everybody. I'm Evie Roberts, and this is my podcast, Talking in the Dark. Welcome. The aim of this podcast is to raise awareness about blindness, visual impairment, and disability in general, in a happy and light-hearted way. For those of you that don't know, I am blind. I was born with a condition called bilateral anophthalmia. Try spelling that one. It basically means that when I was born, my eyes didn't develop properly, so I wear prosthetics instead. The goal of this podcast is to remove some of the stigma and stereotypes around disabilities, whilst also having fun at the same time. Each week, I will be interviewing people from all walks of life, including some with hidden or physical disabilities like mine, and getting to know a little bit more about them and the lives they lead. This week, I am very excited to tell you that I will be talking to record-breaking disabled adventurer, inspirational speaker, and author Darren Edwards. My name is Evie Roberts, and this is my podcast, Talking in the Dark. Welcome. Hi Darren, how are you?
Hey Evie, thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
Oh, it's really lovely to have you.
No, absolute pleasure.
So what have you been up to today?
Today, I've been doing a lot of expedition planning, actually, which is really exciting for a groundbreaking expedition to sit ski to the South Pole, which takes a lot of planning, preparation, and it's exciting though.
Oh yeah, I can imagine that would take a lot of preparation. How long has that kind of been in the works for?
You know what? That's been a dream since probably I was your age. I hate to say that because that makes me sound old and I'm only 30. But I don't know about you, but when you read or hear about Shackleton and Captain Scott and the kind of, these huge endeavors to reach the South Pole and explore Antarctica, I think from a very early age, I was like, captured by that. And somehow at the age of 33, having acquired a disability and a spinal cord injury at some point in the process, the opportunity is now there. So you've got to take it with both hands.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, that sounds amazing. When are you gonna do that?
That'll be December.
Oh, right. Yeah, so quite a while away, but it'll go quick, won't it?
Yeah, anything like that. You think it's a million miles away, and then you wake up and it's the next day. And yeah, but we got to wait till December because that is summer in Antarctica. And I think summer is a little bit of a joke because it means it's just going to be -20 and not -60. So lucky us.
Yeah, I mean, at least it's less cold.
Yeah, that's something.
Yeah, I guess if you really look at the positives, it's like, okay, yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Right then. So I know that your disability is not one that you were born with and is rather the result of an accident. Can you please begin by telling me a bit about life before your accident and how the accident happened?
Of course, yeah. So me before, I would describe as somebody who loved adventure, who was a mountaineer, a climber, very proud to be kind of pursuing a career as a soldier as well. So a lot of life was wrapped up in my identity, which involved the use of my legs and getting up mountains and climbing cliff faces and kind of pushing myself out of my comfort zone and I think developing a sense of confidence that I hadn't at school, because at school I kind of struggled. So in the mountains, I discovered the power of being resilient and the power of things going wrong, and you learn and you come back a bit stronger. And everything was going in a really good direction. So my climbing and mountaineering, I was about to take to the Himalayas and to start, climbing my first big mountain, proper big mountain. My career as a soldier was going the way I wanted it to. And then one day, on a day much like many other, to be completely honest, I was with my best friend at a rock face about an hour from where I live. And I live near the mountains of North Wales. I'm very lucky. And this particular rock face is sort of 200 foot tall, a vertical limestone rock face. And me and Matt, my best friend, had spent the whole day kind of crisscrossing this route, climbing different routes of different difficulties. And with lead climbing, the person that's the first climber is taking the majority of the risk because they're putting in their protective gear into the rock. And the partner below belays them and tries to protect them as best they can. And it's as we get towards the end of the afternoon, we're about to wrap things up, that there's time for one final climb to the final section of World's End, which is the name of the rock face we're at. And I say to Matt, I'll lead. So I kind of walk away from him on this ledge that is probably about 6 foot wide in total. And I look up and I start to ascend this final 35 to 40 foot section of vertical rock. And I get to the top. And admittedly, it was at the very limit of what I could do, but I got to the top. And it was only once I was at the top that I was safe and I felt secure, that I unclipped from the rope and I went to look down at Matt, who stood on this 6 foot wide ledge, 35, 40 foot below me. And we look at each other, and it's more or less as I look back from him that the section of rock that I'm stood on shifts beneath my feet. And all of a sudden, my feet fall from beneath me. And I go from feeling very safe and very secure to scared and vulnerable and falling through the air with nothing I can do to stop it. And had it not been for the reactions of Matt, I wouldn't have survived. But I landed flat on my back on that little ledge and I broke my back on impact. And I didn't know it at the time, but I'd severed my spinal cord and I'd rendered myself paralyzed from the chest down instantly. And I'd broken ribs, collapsed a lung, and I continued to fall. And I was tumbling and I was about to slip off that ledge that Matt was stood on when he sprinted to save his best friend, risking his own life, and threw his body on top of mine and stopped me from falling any further. And in that moment, I knew that my best friend had just saved my life, but I also knew that I was badly injured because I couldn't feel or move my legs. And yeah, that was the day that changed everything, a day that started a 3 hour rescue with the mountain rescue team and with the Coast Guard helicopter, and the start of a completely new life and a new journey that was unexpected. And I think you probably know how it feels, daunting as well at times.
Yes, definitely. I mean, just listening to you explain that, I mean, that is terrifying, but obviously you were so lucky having Matt there at the time to help you out.
Yeah, that's the power of friendship, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Mhm.
Now, therethe's obviously a transition to learning to live with a disability. What did that journey entail for you?
That was difficult, because for someone who had for so many years been quite proud of being physically fit and strong, and what I thought I was as tough. I thought I was tough, and I look back now and it makes me laugh because I probably wasn't. But I then all of a sudden had lost, 10 kilos in weight, lying in a hospital bed for a month and a half without being able to move and being really weak. And I remember the first time I went for my proper, first physio session, I could barely lift myself out of a wheelchair. I was so weak and I had to, I don't know, it was really tough on my pride and my ego because I was, I don't know. Yeah, I just felt like a completely different person. And I had to build myself back up from the real basic stuff. Even sitting in a wheelchair without falling out of it was like a massive task. Or all of a sudden, a curb, which is only a couple of inches high, was like a mountain that you had to try and like overcome without falling out backwards. And it was difficult. It was really, and no one's probably asked me this question before, so I probably never answered it like I am, but it was a real slow process of building a bit of confidence back. But having to be humble and have the humility to accept that this was going to be a long journey and it was going to be a tough one. But, I was surrounded by people that were helping me to look to the future. And those people were kind of encouraging me to think about the person that I wanted to be and the person that would overcome this challenge in front of them and to think more long term. So it really helped with the short term frustrations and setbacks and trials and tribulations because I was trying to pursue this kind of bigger purpose and this bigger version of who I would be at some point in the future. So yeah, really good question. Really good. No one's ever asked me that question before. So yeah.
Thank you. But yeah, I can imagine that having a good support network around you, having those people there to encourage you, I can imagine that that would have been really important for you.
Yeah, for sure. Like towards the end of the 5 months in hospital, I had a bit of both. I had a girlfriend who I thought I was going to marry that walked away and said, this isn't something that I can do and it isn't for me. And that broke my heart. So on one hand, I had people that couldn't see past the disability. And on the other, I had these incredible friends that were like, look, let's take on a challenge. Let's do something. Let's make, let's turn tragedy into triumph. And when I said to them, I think I want to buy a kayak, having never kayaked or canoed in my life before, those friends were like, awesome, let's do it. Let's go get one. Let's make it happen. Let's hire a swimming pool. Let's get you in it. And really, it was that was the start of this kind of incredible journey that has taken place completely unexpectedly.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously, you've just kind of mentioned about the kayak, and I believe that that was the first expedition you did after your accident. So, where did the inspiration come from? And, how did the expedition go?
The inspiration came from the fact that I saw pictures of. I wanted to see somebody who was disabled or in a wheelchair or with a spinal cord injury that was doing adventurous things, and I really struggled to find someone, which was kind of disheartening. But I saw a picture of a kayak on a lake, and it was a picture of two friends next to each other. And I was like, well, I could do that. I don't need my legs to kayak. I didn't know that they were very useful, but I didn't need them. So that's where the inspiration kind of originally came from. And then I went to, competing in para canoe, which is like the Paralympic sprint kayaking racing. And it was actually from failure that the expedition came from. So for 3 years, I was an athlete and I was, aspiring to qualify for Tokyo 2020. And I missed out. I narrowly failed. And it was actually from failure that this expedition to kayak from Land's End to John O'Groats, from the very bottom to the very top of the UK, came about, because I didn't want the fact I'd failed to be the defining feature of my life. I wanted to use all of that hard work and determination and do something with it. So I called up four friends that I'd met through a military charity that had each been through a life-changing injury. And I just said to them, look, I've got this crazy idea. I reckon it'll take us about a month. I reckon it's about 1,400 kilometers, and no one's done it before, especially not people with disabilities. Do you want to give it a go? And they're all a bit like me, very optimistic and ambitious and kind of resilient. And they were like, yeah, okay. So that's where the expedition came from. It was incredible. 26 days. We kayaked through the Atlantic Ocean, the Bristol Channel, the Irish Sea, the North Sea, some really wild and wonderful places. And we faced some really difficult moments where things could have gone wrong. We were facing huge waves and storms and winds. And working together as a team of five, we overcame all of our injuries and our disabilities. And if I got thrown out of the boat by a wave, I just grabbed to the top of it and dragged myself back in. And the guys encouraged me to keep going. And we, day by day, we're out at sea for 12, 13, 14 hours, covering maybe 50, 60 or 70 kilometers. And it was incredible. And I think it was on that expedition, as we got towards the end, as we're going through the lochs of southwest Scotland, on one day we had a pod of dolphins jumping out of the water, doing flips in front of us. And honestly, it was just magical. And it made me realize that my life after my accident and my life with the disability far outweighed my life before. I was doing something adventurous, something challenging with my best friends beside me. And it was the real first time I recognized that I had everything I needed in my life to still be happy, regardless of if I used a wheelchair or not. So hopefully that answers the question about how it went, because it was just life-changing.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds incredible. So, would you say in a way then that you're kind of thankful for your disability? Has it kind of opened your mind a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. I think you've captured that perfectly there. I suddenly became grateful for what I had, and I suddenly realized that it was kind of like an unexpected gift. You wouldn't have wanted it at the time, and nobody would want a disability if they could choose to have it or not initially. But once you realize that kind of the fact it can be a superpower, and the fact that it can set you apart from everybody else, and you kind of, give hope and inspiration to others that are going through difficult times, I think you realize it is a real gift. And you probably know this as well with what you're doing with this podcast. You're really helping to inspire other people. And that's priceless, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I hope I'm inspiring some people,
You
but yeah,
definitely are, I promise you.
oh, thank you. But yeah, definitely like I think there's definitely moments when you have a disability where you're like, why me? Like of
Yeah.
all the
The
people,
frustrations, yeah.
yeah, you're like, of all the people this could have happened to, why me? But then you also have those moments where you're like, okay, maybe this is why, because maybe, I mean, maybe if I didn't have this disability, would I be able to do this? Or, and I mean, I definitely have moments like that. I don't know about you.
I do, yeah, but yeah, of course I do. But I think me and you both know the secret, which is that our disabilities open doors as well as close them. So we can focus on the doors that have been closed, and we can get frustrated about that and kind of think, why me, like you say, and we all go there sometimes. But we then ignore the open doors and we ignore the opportunities that's still there for us to live a life so different to anybody else's that people will look at what you do and be like, wow. And that is pretty special, I think, you know.
Yeah.
So I think that turns why me into, yeah, I don't know what the opposite of why me is.
I don't know either, to be fair.
This was meant to be. Maybe this is meant to be where we're all, this is where we were always meant to be. And we had to go on our journey to discover that. And some people are further behind us and they've not got there yet, but they will. And other people might have realized this years ago and they're doing incredible things.
Yes, you're totally right. Obviously, you mentioned before your accident that you perceived yourself as really strong and really tough. Do you think that having a disability has made you stronger, maybe in a mental sense?
Yeah, for sure. That's why I think I look back and I laugh at the person that I thought I was and how I was tough and I was, doing stuff with the army that was really difficult and I was like, climbing these big mountains. And really, I think when I look back, I was trying to show people how tough I could be. And maybe I was trying to show myself how tough I could be. And now I'm not trying to prove anything to anybody. I don't do any of these expeditions to try and show people, look how tough Darren is. But because of the experience that, I went through with my accident, with my rehab, with everything that's followed, I'm so much more mentally tough and actually just content and happy with who I am as a person. I know I'm not the smartest or the bravest or the strongest or the best looking or any of those things, and I don't need to be. I'm kind of quite content and happy to be me and to live a life different to others, just like you are. And yeah, so I think I do look back at the old version of me with quite a fond smile and oh dear, you were so young and you didn't realize, Darren, kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. So in 2022, you took part in the World Marathon Challenge.
Mm.
Can you please tell me a bit about that?
I had no idea what the World Marathon Challenge was until I got a phone call that explained that it's 7 marathons, 7 days, 7 continents, and you run 186 miles in 168 hours and you travel 52,000 miles around the world in order to do it. And at that point in history, I think 150 people had done it. So more had been to space, and no one with a disability had done it. And the person that was on the phone with me kind of said, look, I'd like you to do this and to prove that on a set of wheels it can be done. And he was like, are you up for it? And I kind of said, yeah, okay, go on then. And he was like, brilliant. How many marathons have you done before? And I hesitated because the answer was none. And I considered lying. And then I thought, no, nothing good is going to come from lying to this guy. So I was like, look, I've never done one, but I will train as hard as I need to do this. And credit where it's due to him, he believed me and said, okay, I'll leave it with you. And I had 10 months. So I had 10 months to train for something I'd never done anything similar to, 10 months to suddenly start doing loads of miles around where I live with my dog, who loved it, who came running with me every time. He's a border collie. And then all of a sudden, like we were talking about Antarctica, those 10 months went by so quickly. And all of a sudden, we're on a plane leaving South Africa and we're flying over to Antarctica. And we set down on the snow and the ice, and it's minus 27, and the wind is like ripping through. And we had 6 hours to do a marathon on the snow and the ice. And I was on like a specially designed wheelchair mountain bike kind of looking thing. And it took me 5 hours and 50 minutes of battling through the wind and the cold, biting cold, to get back to the plane. And with 10 minutes to spare, and then the reward was to get on this plane and fly back to South Africa, do another marathon the next day. And we did this crazy journey across the world where you just did your marathon, got back on a plane, flew, marathon, back on a plane, flew, and your mind had no idea where you were. Your body was absolutely exhausted. And then 7 days later, it's 2 in the morning when you land in Miami, which is the final, North America, the final continent, and did that final 26.2 miles in the middle of the night and finished something that 10 months earlier I thought was absolutely bonkers. And there we go. So yeah, it was incredible.
Oh my gosh, that sounds like so incredible, but also so intense. But
Yeah.
I would imagine that I guess like all your expeditions, that feeling when you've accomplished that must be like the most incredible feeling in the world.
Yeah, for sure. And I went into it honestly, I went into it knowing that I could fail. And I went into it knowing that day one might screw everything because I knew that the snow and the ice of Antarctica represented the greatest risk of, frostbite that I wouldn't know I was getting because I can't feel anything below my chest, or, I might get stuck in the snow, my wheels just refuse to move, and that's the end of it. Um, so I kind of went into it knowing that there was a 50% chance of failure. And I was happy with that because, that Paralympic journey I was talking about had
Hmm.
taught me a very important lesson. And that is that beyond failure is opportunity, and beyond failure is kind of like, these learnings that you can apply to where you go next. So I knew that even if I failed, I would find a sense of meaning and purpose in it. And the fact I got to the end 7 days later, I was quite astounded. I was kind of in a state of disbelief that I was about to start the final marathon and it was looking like it was going to work. So yeah, so I rolled across the finish line absolutely amazed and surprised and exhausted. I went straight to bed. I thought I was going to go out and have a party. I didn't. I just went and found a hotel and probably didn't get up for about 2 days, I think.
I don't blame you, to be honest. Like, it must be, I can't even imagine that. It must be so tiring. And I think when you finished it, you just need sleep, don't you?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, exactly. Sleep and food seemed to
Yeah.
be two things. And then a couple of days later, it was time to get on another flight to come home. And I was like, oh, I'm so done with flying.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine at that point you're just like, I don't want to see another plane for like a year.
Exactly. I wanted to come home to the countryside and just walk my dog and chill out a little bit.
Yeah, totally. And I think your mind and your body probably needed that.
For sure. Both. Yeah, they both did.
Yeah. So your most recent expedition crossed Europe's largest ice cap with an all-disabled team, much like your kayaking expedition. What would you say are some of the benefits of working with other disabled individuals to accomplish these challenges?
What a good question. That's a very, very good question. So I think there's a big difference in terms of doing an expedition where you might be the only disabled person and you've got maybe, for argument's sake, four able-bodied people that are supporting you every step of the way. Because it's brilliant and that's teamwork and it's kind of got its value. But say the Iceland expedition, there was three of us and we were attempting to cross Europe's largest ice cap unsupported alone, and all three of us had spinal injuries. So I'm, a T6 paraplegic, so I'm paralyzed below my chest. I can't feel or move. Ed Jackson was a former professional rugby player, broke his neck and recovered to be able to walk again, but still struggles with the impacts of his spinal injury. And Niall is kind of similar to Ed. He had an accident and he can walk, but he still has some issues that you can't see, bladder and bowels, the other things that spinal injury affects. So the three of us had to really, like, it takes teamwork to another level because there were things that I couldn't do and I needed Ed or Niall to do for me. And vice versa, there were things that Ed couldn't do that I could do for him. So I'm a paraplegic. Ed is a quadriplegic, which means that all four limbs are affected. So whilst Ed can stand up and walk and he's a big, strong guy, when he gets cold, his hands start to cramp up and close up and he can't control them. So all of a sudden, in the middle of a storm with 90-mile-an-hour winds and our tent nearly being ripped from the surface of the snow, Ed needs to get out and help Niall to pin the tent down. And because his hands are cold, he can't put his boots on, he can't put his gloves on. So all of a sudden, there's that teamwork element where I do that for Ed because I can't get out and help Niall. So I think it's just such an inspiring, powerful message because it goes to show that not only can disabled people do stuff where they are the only disabled people and there's a whole team of able-bodied people supporting them, but we can actually work together as a team of adaptive expedition, adventurers to overcome our limits, our individual limits. And it was the same on Kayak for Heroes. We all had our different ways that our disabilities affected us, but we looked at it through a mindset of, okay, let's adapt what we have to, let's improvise where we need to, always with the goal of getting to the end, whether that was John O'Groats or the edge of the ice cap.
Yeah, totally. And I suppose that accomplishing these challenges would bring you guys so much closer as a team from when you started out to when you finished it.
Yeah, you start as teammates. Let's call it teammates. You start as teammates and people that maybe don't know each other all that well, and you finish as like lifelong friends who have been through a really formative experience that you will never forget. And it's the same with my friends that I went through, selection for the Special Forces Reserve with. There were moments there where we had to dig together to get through, and you never forget that.
Yeah, definitely. So, do you use specifically adapted wheelchairs and equipment for these adventures?
Yeah, yeah. So everything requires some sort of special bit of kit that can be designed or built. For Antarctica and for the Iceland ice cap crossing, I used a sit ski, which is kind of like a wheelchair without wheels with skis mounted beneath it, and you use ski poles to push yourself along. Um, I think depending on the challenge, you look at it and you think, okay, what do we need to create or adapt or adjust? And that's what I love, is it becomes like a problem solving. It means that adventure has a problem solving element to it that an able-bodied adventurer wouldn't have. So if me and you went on an adventure together, we would work together to figure out the best way to do something, and it would be completely different to how anybody else does it. And I think that is pretty cool.
Yeah, it really is, honestly. And I guess that shows as well that pretty much anything can be adapted if you problem solve and go, well, how can we make this work?
Exactly. No, completely agree.
So you've also, as well as, accomplishing like loads of expeditions, you've also published a book called Strength Through Adversity. From a mental health perspective, what attributes would you say have enabled you to have such a positive outlook?
Oh, one of them was writing. So it wasn't my first option. I remember the kind of just coming out of intensive care and starting my spinal rehabilitation. And one of the psychologists that was on the ward came and spoke to me and said, look, how are you dealing with everything psychologically? And I said, I'm all right. And she was like, no, how are you dealing with it? And I said, I'm just not thinking about it. And she said, that is a terrible strategy. She said that if you try to avoid thinking about it, one day it's going to creep up on you and it's going to hit you like a ton of bricks and you won't know how to respond. So, what I want you to do, and this is what she said to me, is to find a way of expressing your emotions. She was like, look, sit and talk to a good friend about how you feel and what happened and just talk it out, or get out a pen and write it down on paper. And she said, when you're done, you can throw it in the bin, you can burn it, or you can save it. So, my book, details all of those moments, and that book is actually compiled of the different things that I wrote. So the chapter on my accident wasn't a chapter. It was never intended to be a chapter. It was intended to be me trying to heal psychologically. And I remember that taking me a month to write because it was so difficult to go back to those moments of genuine fear and kind of feeling like I was about to lose everybody I cared about and writing about it and saying how I felt. And, we talk about mental toughness and what mental attributes help you get through those moments. In a way, it is not ignoring how you feel. It's expressing how you feel and finding the best way for you to do that. Whether you speak to someone you really trust and you can just say it and they don't judge you, or, writing it down or saying it to a dictaphone, whatever it may be. And yeah, the only reason there's a book is because I continued to write and I continued to talk about how I felt and what was happening in my life. And then 5 years later, I was like, oh, this could be a book. And that is what it turned out to be.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. But yeah, I completely agree with you. It's just about finding some way of expressing those emotions. But I think even that in itself is daunting. Thinking about what you've been through and expressing that in whatever way you find helps.
Mm,
Even that is daunting to actually think about.
yeah, completely. But it's so important though.
Oh yeah, definitely. It totally is. So, what has been your proudest moment so far?
Proudest moment is easily, it's nothing to do with expeditions, it's getting married. So, as you know, I kind of said that the person that I thought was the one, if we'll call it that, left me when I was in hospital, and that devastated me. And I thought I would never find love or be loved again. And a couple of years later, I met someone who, when I was 17 and 18, and I was my first ever job working as a waiter at Pizza Hut, someone that I absolutely fancied and adored, but never said anything to. I never had the confidence to say, "Hey, do you want to go and go for dinner?" And what is 10 years later and 2 years after my accident, we have a chance reconnect and we kind of say, "Hey, let's go on a date. Let's meet up. I always wanted to ask you on a date." And she was like, "Oh, I always wanted to go on a date with you." And we went on another date and another date and another date, fell in love. And then last summer, so the summer, July 2023, we brought all of our friends and family together at a gorgeous wedding venue in Shrewsbury and we got married. And I stood up in a special wheelchair that stands me up at the end of the aisle. And I kind of, read my vows to her and said that, I thought no one would ever love me like I am. And you show me every day that it doesn't matter that I'm disabled or I sit in a wheelchair. And so nothing to do with expeditions, but all to do with emotions and the most important thing, which is like, those people that you have in your life that are special to you.
Oh my gosh, that is amazing. And especially the chance that you guys reconnected by, I guess, like pure chance. I mean, that
Cool.
doesn't happen very often, but obviously it's amazing when it does.
Yeah. And I firmly believe it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't had my accident.
Right, okay. I mean, that's really cool.
Yeah.
So obviously you've mentioned your expedition that you're, embarking on in December, but do you have any other future goals or aspirations?
Yes, and it's not about me actually. It is about recognizing that I've been very lucky to have done the things that we've spoken about because I've always had the people around me that have said, "Cool, let's do it. Let's make it happen." So I'm setting up a charity with one of my really close friends called Nick, and it's going to be called Adaptive Expeditions. And we are going to organize and plan and host expeditions for, adaptive adventurers, disabled adventurers, whatever you want to call it, and we are going to empower people to take on their own little challenges, whether that's kayaking along a river and camping overnight or a bigger expedition, like the ones that I get to do, and offering those to people that otherwise wouldn't get those opportunities. So I am looking forward to seeing you on one of these.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, I think it'd be great. So there we go. So that is the long-term plan, and I think it's just acknowledging that I've been very lucky, and it is about time that I pay that forward in some way to people that otherwise wouldn't get those opportunities.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And like that sounds brilliant. So I wish you all the best of luck with that. I'm sure it will be amazing.
No, thank you. Yeah, gonna get you involved. Don't you worry.
I would love to be fair. That sounds great. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. You are such an incredible person, and it's been such a pleasure to meet you.
No, as are you. No, honestly, and I mean that sincerely. What you're doing is incredible, and I am very privileged to be a small part of your journey. And hopefully, it's not the last time that we chat.
Oh, I'm sure it won't be. And thank you to my audience for listening, and I will see you all next time.